The Hobbit by John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hall, like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with panelled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles around called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then another. No going upstairs to the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, wardrobes, kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows looking over his garden, and meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. This hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighbourhood of the hill for a time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they had never had any adventures, or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is the story of how Baggins had an adventure, and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbours' respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit. What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some descriptions nowadays, since they've become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height, and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them, except the ordinary, everyday sort, which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large, stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colours, chiefly green and yellow. They wear no shoes, because their feet grow natural, leathery soles, and thick, warm, brown hair, like the stuff on their heads, which is curly. They have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and they laugh deep, fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go along with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit of Bilbo Baggins, that it was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the three remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the front of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in a while members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up, but the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures before she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money, that was to be found either under the hill or over the hill or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it's probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his make-up from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The The chance never arrived, until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I've just described for you, until he had in fact apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, Gandalf came by. Gandalf. If you'd heard only a quarter of what I've heard about him, and I've only heard a very little of all there is to hear, you'd be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He'd not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Tuck died. In fact, the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He'd been away over the hill and across the water on businesses of his own, since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointed blue hat, a long grey coat, a silver scarf over which his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, and the grass was very green. But Gandalf looked at him from under his long, bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning? Or do you mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel this is a good morning, or that it is a morning to be good upon?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo. "And a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors, into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry, we have all the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful grey ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking, and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I've no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone." "I should think so in these parts. We are plain quiet folk, and we have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner, and I can't think what anyone sees in them," said Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. But he decided it was not quite his sort and wanted him to go away. But the old man didn't move. He stood, leaning on his stick and gazing at the hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you do use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that you won't be good until I move off." No, not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir. I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you know mine, although you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf. Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be Good Morning by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door." "Gandalf? Gandalf? Good gracious me! Not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone until ordered? Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants, and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons? Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. I remembered those. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. Splendid! They used to go up like lilies and snapdragons and laudanums of fire and hang in the twilight all evening." You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe, also that he was very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on, not the Gandalf who is responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses getting off into the blue for mad adventures, anything from climbing trees to visiting elves, or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite. Used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business. Where else should I be? Said the wizard. All the same, I'm pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for. I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have. Twice now. My pardon. I will give it you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too. Very likely, if you ever get over it. Sorry, I don't want any adventures. Thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea anytime you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. With that, the hobbit turned and scuttled inside his round green door, and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. What on earth did I ask him to tea for? He said to himself, as he went to the pantry. He'd only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door and laughing long, but quietly. After a while he stepped up and with the spike on his staff scratched a queer sign on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Then he strode away, just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake, and beginning to think that he escaped adventures very well. The next day he'd almost forgotten about Gandalf. He didn't remember things very well unless he put them down on his engagement tablet. Like this: Gandalf, tea, Wednesday. Yesterday he'd been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle, and put out another cup and saucer, an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, he was going to say, when he saw that it wasn't Gandalf after all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard, tucked into a golden belt, and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed aside, just as if he'd been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and said, Dwellin, at your service, with a low bow. Bilbo Baggins at yours, said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, I'm just about to take tea. Pray come have some with me. A little stiff perhaps, but he meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came along and hung his things upon your hall without a word of explanation? They'd not been at the table long. In fact, they'd hardly reached the third cake, when there came another, even louder ring at the bell. Excuse me, said the hobbit, and ran off to the door. So you've got here at last? That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time. But it wasn't Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped aside as soon as the door was open, just as if he'd been invited. I see they've begun to arrive already, he said, when he caught sight of Dwellin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it. I'm Balin at your service, he said, with his hand on his breast. Thank you, said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they have begun to arrive flustered in badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host, knew his duty and stuck to whatever he might have to go without. Come along, have some tea, he managed to say after taking a deep breath. A little beer would suit me better, if it's all the same to you, my good sir, said Balin with the white beard. But I don't mind some seed cake, if you have any. Lots, Bilbo found himself answering, to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off, too, to the cellar to fill a pint beer mug, and then to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes which he'd baked that afternoon for his own after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, when a loud ring came at the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf for certain this time, he thought, as he puffed along the passage. But it was not. It was 2 more dwarves, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards. Each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. What can I do for you, my dwarves? He said. Killy, at your service, said one. And Filly, said the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. At yours and your families, replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. Dwalin and Balin here already, said Killy. Let us join the throng. Throng? Thought Mr. Baggins. I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink. He'd only just had a sip in the corner, while the first 4 dwarves sat round the table and talked about mines and gold and trouble with goblins and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things which he didn't understand and didn't want to, for they sounded too much adventurous, when, ding-a-ling-a-ling, his bell rang again, as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. Someone at the door, he said, blinking. Some 4, I should say, by the sound, said Filly. Besides, we saw them coming along as by in the distance. The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands, and wondered what had happened, and what was going to happen, and whether they would all stay to supper. Then the bell rang again, louder than ever, and he had to come to the door. It was not 4 after all, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He'd hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, At your service, one after another. Dorry, Norry, Orry, Oin, Gloin were their names, and very soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, a brown hood, a white hood were all hanging off the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had become almost a throng. Some called for ale, some for porter, one for coffee, all of them for cakes. So the hobbit was very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set in the hearth, and the seed cakes were gone. The dwarves were starting on a round of buttered scones, when there came a loud knock. Not a ring, but a hard rat-a-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry, and altogether bewildered and bewuthered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarves, 4 more! And there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He'd made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He'd also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark he'd put there the morning before. Carefully, carefully, he said. It is not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a popgun. Let me introduce Biffa, Boffer, Bomber, and especially Thorin. At your service, said Biffa, Boffer, and Bomber, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, in fact no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Biffa, Boffer and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty, and he said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, Pray don't mention it, and stopped frowning. Now we're all here, said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods and the best detachable party hoods and his own hat hanging on the pegs. Quite a merry gathering. I hope there's something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, a little red wine, I think, for me. And for me, said Thorin. And raspberry jam and apple tart, said Biffa. And mince pies and cheese, said Buffer. And pork pie and salad, said Bomber. And more cakes, and ale, and coffee, if you don't mind, called the other dwarves through the door. Put on a few eggs, says a good fellow, Gandalf called after him, as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries. And, just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. He seems to know about as much of the inside of the larders as I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confiscate and be bothering these dwarves, he said aloud. Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Philly and Killy behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked out the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlour, and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarves all round, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary, and not in the least an adventure. The dwarves ate, and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. I suppose you'll all stay to supper, he said in his politest, unoppressing tones. Of course, said Thorin. And after, we shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first, now to clear up. Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet, and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top with one hand, while the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage. But the dwarves only started to sing. Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pound them up with a thumping pole. And when you're finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates. And of course they did none of those dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away, safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender, smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and whenever he told one to go, it went up the chimney, or behind the clock, or the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a small smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover above the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about him already in the dim light. It made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he'd been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he himself had sent over the hill. Now for some music, said Thorin. Bring out the instruments. Killy and Philly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dorry, Norry and Orry brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Biffa and Buffer went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, Excuse me, I left mine in the porch. Just bring mine in with you, said Thorin. They came back with vials as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot almost everything else, and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water, and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came back into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. Suddenly first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like the song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. For ancient king and elvish lord, there made a gleaming golden horn, they shaped and wrought, unlike they court, to hide in gems on hilt of sword. Far o'er the misty mountains cold. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands, by cunning, and by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something Tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see great mountains, to hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels and of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up, improbably. Somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins of Bag End Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until all the dwarves had gone away. But suddenly he found the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him, with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo, apologetically. "We like the dark," said all the dwarves. "Dark for dark business, there are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf, "let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit, may the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise for his wine and ale." He paused for breath, and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious, and worst of all, fellow conspirator, though no noise came out. So Thorin went on. "We have met to discuss our plans, our ways, our means, our policies, devices. We shall soon become before the break of day on the start of a long journey. a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, known to us all. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps one or two of the younger dwarves, the exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation. This is Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he'd been allowed, he'd probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't manage it any longer, and may never return. He began to feel a shriek coming from inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarfs sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its fire-wet glare the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on a hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor, and kept on calling out, "Struck by lightning! Struck by lightning!" over and over again, and that was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of his way on the drawing-room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf, as they sat down again. "Gets funny queer fits, but he is one of the best, if not best as fierce as a dragon in a pinch." If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you'll realise that this was not only poetic exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great-grand-uncle Bullroarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Gram in the Battle of the Green Fields, and knocked their King Gormfindal's head off clean with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air, and went down a rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won, and the game of golf was invented at the same moment. In the meantime, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing-room. After a while, and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlour. This is what he heard, Gloin speaking. "Will he do, you think? It's all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement will be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives, and kill the lot of us. I think it would sound more like a fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I would have been sure we'd come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped my eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar." Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he could go without breakfast and bed to be fierce. As to the little fellow bobbing on the mat, it made him really fierce. Many times afterwards the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and you put your foot in it." "Pardon me," he said. "If I've overheard words that you were saying, I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I'm right in believing that you think I am no good. I will show you. I've no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I'm quite sure you've come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert. I had a great-great-great-great-uncle once, Bullroarer Took, and—" Yes, but that was long ago," said Gloin. "I was talking about you, and I assure you there's a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it's usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like. Some of them do, but it's all the same to us. Gandalf told us there was a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday, tea time." "Of course there is a mark," said Gandalf. "I put it there myself, for a very good reason. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal." He scowled angrily at Gloin at that moment, and the dwarf huddled back into his chair. And when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows until Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. "That's right," said Gandalf. "Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he's a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There's a lot more in him than you guess, and a great deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may possibly all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch a lamp, and let's have a little light on this." On the table, in the light of a big lamp, with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment, rather like a map. "This was made by Thrall, your grandfather, Thorin," he said, in answer to the dwarves' excited questions. "It is a plan of the mountain. I don't see that this will help us much," said Thorin disappointedly, after a glance. "I remember the mountain well enough and the lands around it, and I knew where Mirkwood is and the withered heath where the great dragons bred." "There's a dragon marked red on the mountain," said Balin, "but it'll be easy enough to find him without that if we ever arrive there." "There is one point you haven't noticed," said the wizard, "and that is the secret entrance. You see the rune on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other runes. That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls." "It may have been secret once," said Thorin. "How do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough to know and find out anything there is to know about those old caves." "He may, but he can't have used it for years and years." "Why?" "Because it is too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast," say the runes. "But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale." "It seems a great big hole to me," squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all its favourite walks marked upon it. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. "In lots of ways," said Gandalf, "but in a way this one has been hidden. We don't know what we're going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the mountain. That's the usual dwarf method, I think, isn't it?" "Quite right," said Thorin. "Also," went on Gandalf, "I forgot to mention with the map came a key, a small and curious key. Here it is," he said, and handed it to Thorin. "Keep it safe." "Indeed I will," said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck under his jacket. Now things begin to look more hopeful. This news alters everything for the better. So far we had no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east and quiet as careful as we could, as far as the Long Lake. After that, trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. "We might go over there up along the river running," went Thorin, taking no notice, "and up to the ruins of Dale and the old town and the family there, under the shadows of the mountain. But none of us like the front gate. The river runs right out of it, through the great cliff south of the mountain, and out of it comes a dragon far too often, unless he's changed his habits." "That would be no good," said the wizard. "Not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighbourhood heroes are scarce or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers. Dragons are comfortably far off and legendary. That is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now, let's get on and find some plans. Very well then, said Thorin. Supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions. He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. Well, first I should like to know a little bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean, about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and so further. Bless me, said Thorin. Haven't you got a map? Didn't you hear our song? Haven't we been talking about this for more than an hour? All the same, I would like it in plain and clear writing, he said obstinately, putting on his business manner, normally reserved for people who try to borrow money from him, and doing his best to appear wise and confident and professional, and live up to Gandalf's expectations. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, remuneration, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and what am I going to come back alive? Very well, said Thorin. Long ago, my grandfather Thor's time, our family was driven out of the far north, and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my father's ancestors, Thrain the Old. But now they mined and they tunnelled, and they made huger halls and greater workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, I believe they found a good famous... And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as a valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths, and reward even the least skilful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take in their apprentices, and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Although those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it, not to speak of the most marvellous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armour and jewels, and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly, that was what bought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, you know, from men and elves and dwarves. Wherever they can find them, they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they're killed, and never undo a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from bad, though they usually have a good notion of current market value, but they can't make a thing of themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armour. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there. The dwarves flying south were getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming down from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaking and crackling in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was luckily a fine adventurous lad in those days who was running off about, and it saved my life in that day. But well, a good day off, we saw the dragon settle on the mountain in a spout of flame. By that time all the bells were ringing in the dale, and the warriors were arming. None escaped that way. The river rushed up and destroyed most of the warriors, the usual unhappy story, through the front gate, and routed out through the halls and lanes and tunnels and alleys and cellars, mansions and passages. Probably, for that is the dragon's way, he's piled it all up in the great gate, a great heap inside, and sleeps in it for a bed. Later he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat until Dale was ruined and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now I don't know for certain. I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were well kept outside wept in hiding and cursed Smaug. And there we were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked grim and they said little. When I asked how they got away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that the day and the proper time I should know. After that they went away, and we have had enough as earn our livings as best we could, up and down the lands, often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work, or even coal mining. But we've never forgotten our stolen treasure, even now, when I will allow we have a good bit laid by and are not so badly off. Thorin stroked the gold chain around his neck. We still mean to get it back, and I mean to bring our curses home to Smaug if we can. I've often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door which only they would know about, but apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got hold of it, and why he did not come down to see me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it. I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thrall was killed, remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, was sent away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and has never been seen by you since. True, true, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you, and if I have chosen my own time and my own way for handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Well, here it is, he said, handing over the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would like to have said the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard, slowly and grimly, gave this map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the same map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of most unpleasant sort he had. But he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the necromancer. Whatever are you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and he had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He's an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. If they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world, one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, accidentally, out loud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered they answered, Hear what I've got to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there's a side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes. I suppose if you sit on the door long enough, I dare say, you'll think of something. And well, don't you know, I think we took long enough for one night. If you see what I mean. What about bed, and an early start, and all that? I'll give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham. Starting a journey, fried, not poached, mind you, don't break 'em. After all the others had ordered their breakfast without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for them all. He filled all his spare rooms and made beds on chairs and sofas. Before he got them all stowed away and made his way to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up is about whether or not to bother to get up early and to cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was now quite not sure that he was going on any journey this evening. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the bedroom next to him. Far over the misty mountain cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he